The neighbor only gave us one rule: turn off the porch light by 10 and never ever open the door. My father thought it was just local superstition, a mountain myth to scare the newcomers. But when the clock struck midnight, the crying started. It sounded exactly like my little brother, but my brother was standing right next to me, frozen in terror. Whatever was on the porch wasn't human. It was waiting for the light to lead it home. Deep in the Appalachian mountains, some secrets are kept behind locked doors. This is the story of the Miller family, a father's pride, and the night they discovered why the locals never leave the lights on after dark. In these woods, the light doesn't protect you, it marks you. The shadows of the Appalachian Mountains did not just fall, they seemed to seep into the valley like spilled ink. Elias Miller killed the engine of the station wagon, the silence of the woods rushing in to fill the void left by the motor. Beside him, Sarah stared at the sagging porch of their new home, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her cardigan. In the back seat, young Toby clutched his stuffed rabbit, his eyes wide as they tracked the swaying branches of the ancient oaks. It was a house built of weathered wood and secrets tucked miles away from the nearest paved road. As they began unloading the first of the boxes, a rhythmic crunching of gravel alerted them to a presence. Standing at the edge of the driveway was their only neighbor, a man named Silas, whose skin looked like cured leather. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he pointed a gnarled finger at the rusted light fixture hanging above the front door. He told them the rule with a voice that sounded like grinding stones. He warned them to extinguish the porch light before 10 o'clock every single night. He told them that no matter what they heard, no matter how desperate the voice or how familiar the cry, they must never, ever open the door. Elias laughed it off as they moved inside, dismissing the old man's words as the eccentricities of a lonely mountaineer. The interior of the house smelled of cedar and damp earth. By 9 o'clock, they had cleared a space in the living room. The warmth of a small fire masking the biting chill of the mountain air. Sarah felt a lingering unease, her gaze constantly drifting toward the front door, but Elias remained focused on the task at hand. He was a man of logic and wood and nails, far removed from the superstitions of the deep woods. As the clock on the mantel ticked toward 10, the mountain fell into a profound, unnatural stillness. The crickets ceased their chirping, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elias stood by the window, looking out into the void. He saw the glow of their porch light casting a long amber rectangle onto the dead leaves of the front yard. It looked like a beacon in an ocean of black. Sarah reminded him of Silas's warning, her voice a fragile whisper in the gloom. Elias reached for the switch but paused. He felt a sudden, stubborn pride. He wasn't going to let a local legend dictate how he ran his household on the very first night. He withdrew his hand, leaving the switch flipped up. The golden light continued to burn, cutting through the darkness, inviting the shadows to come closer. They went upstairs to bed, the house groaning under the weight of their footsteps. Elias fell into a heavy sleep, but Sarah lay awake, listening. At exactly midnight, the first sound came. It wasn't a knock. It was a soft, wet, sliding sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floorboards of the porch. wet sliding sound stopped directly outside the front door. Sarah sat upright in bed, her breath hitching in her throat. Beside her, Elias remained deep in the throes of a heavy sleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic cadence. The house seemed to amplify every sound, the settling of the foundation sounding like the snapping of bone. Then it came, a knock. It was light, almost tentative, as if a child were tapping on the glass. 3 distinct raps echoed through the hollow hallway. Sarah reached out and gripped Elias by the shoulder, shaking him awake. He groaned, blinking away the fog of sleep, but the second set of knocks silenced him instantly. These were heavier, more insistent. Elias rubbed his face, the memory of Silas and his warning flashing through his mind like a strobe light. He checked the digital clock on the nightstand. The red numbers bled into the darkness, glowing 12:15. He moved to the window, peeling back the heavy curtain just enough to peer down at the porch. The amber glow of the light was still burning bright, illuminating the empty porch. There was no one there. No silhouette, no intruder, just the weathered wood and the swirling mountain mist. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, whispering to Sarah that it was just the wind, or perhaps a stray branch. But as he turned back toward the bed, a voice drifted through the floorboards. It was thin and high-pitched, muffled by the heavy oak of the front door. It was the voice of a young boy, crying out for help, claiming he was lost in the cold. Toby appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, his stuffed rabbit dragging on the floor. He whispered that there was a boy outside who wanted to play. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She begged Elias not to go down, reminding him of the old man's specific instruction. But the cries from the porch became more frantic, more visceral. The boy outside began to wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that tore at Elias's paternal instincts. Elias grabbed a heavy flashlight from the dresser, his jaw set in a hard line of defiance. He told Sarah to stay with Toby and lock the bedroom door. He descended the stairs, each step screaming under his weight. As he reached the bottom, the front door rattled in its frame. Something was leaning against it, pushing with a slow, steady pressure. Pause twos. Elias approached the peephole, his hand trembling as he leaned forward. He expected to see a shivering child. Instead, through the fisheye lens, he saw nothing but the empty, illuminated porch. But when he looked down at the base of the door, he saw long gray, multi-jointed fingers sliding through the narrow gap at the threshold, groping for the lock. Elias stumbled back, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the peeling wallpaper of the foyer. The fingers beneath the door were not human. They were ash gray and translucent, with skin that looked like stretched parchment over knitting needles. As he watched, frozen in a state of cold paralysis, the fingers retracted with a sickening leathery slither. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the distant rhythmic thumping of his heart. Then, the crying began again, but the pitch had shifted. It was no longer a boy. It was Sarah's voice pleading for him to open the door from the other side. The deception was so perfect it made his skin crawl. He knew Sarah was upstairs, yet the voice outside carried her exact inflection, her specific tremor of fear. Elias gripped the flashlight like a club, his knuckles white. He realized then that the porch light wasn't a safety measure. It was a lure. The golden glow acted as a stage light for whatever lived in the mountain shadows, inviting them to mimic the things their prey loved most. He backed away from the door, moving toward the kitchen to find a heavier weapon. But a sudden thud against the living room window stopped him cold. The glass didn't break, but it flexed inward under immense pressure. Against the pane, a face pressed hard. It had no nose, no ears, and where the eyes should have been, there were only deep charcoal pits of shadow. The night crawler, 7 foot tall, gaunt frame, hairless skin, was peering in, its elongated skull tilted at an impossible angle. Its mouth was a jagged slit that didn't move, yet the voice of Sarah continued to pour from it, muffled and distorted by the glass. The creature was testing the perimeter, looking for any weakness in the old wood and brittle glass. Upstairs, a scream pierced the air. It wasn't a mimic, it was the real Sarah. Elias abandoned the window and sprinted for the stairs, his boots thundering on the wood. He burst into the master bedroom to find Sarah huddled in the corner with Toby. She pointed a trembling hand toward the ceiling. High above them, in the dark corners of the attic access panel, the wood was splintering. The same gray, multi-jointed fingers were poking through the ceiling, the creature having scaled the exterior of the house with the silent grace of a spider. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. Elias realized with a jolt of terror that by leaving the porch light on Porch, he had given the entity permission to mark the house. It wasn't just at the door anymore. It was everywhere. He grabbed a heavy chair and jammed it under the bedroom door handle, though he knew it would do little against something that could slide through the very cracks of the architecture. The crying outside had stopped, replaced by a low, vibrating hum that made the floorboards beneath their feet shiver. The vibrating hum grew into a low-frequency roar that rattled the teeth in Elias's skull. Above them, the attic hatch didn't just open, it was peeled back like a scab. The night crawler didn't drop down all at once. Instead, its limbs descended with a jerky, mechanical precision, unfolding like the legs of a starving spider. The creature's hairless charcoal gray skin seemed to absorb the meager light of the bedside lamp, creating a localized void in the center of the room. Toby let out a soundless whimper, burying his face into the knit cardigan of his mother. Elias swung the heavy flashlight, the beam catching the creature's midsection. The light revealed a ribcage so prominent it looked like a row of serrated teeth beneath the skin. The entity turned its head, a smooth, featureless dome toward the light source. It didn't have eyes, yet Elias felt a crushing sense of being watched, of being measured. The creature's mouth, a jagged slit, suddenly opened. It didn't scream. Instead, it spoke in Elias's own voice, a perfect, chilling mimicry of his earlier laugh. It was a mocking sound that stripped away the last of his composure. Sarah grabbed a heavy glass vase from the nightstand and hurled it. It shattered against the creature's chest, but the entity didn't even flinch. It simply continued its slow, unfolding descent, its long, multi-jointed fingers reaching for the floorboards. Elias realized they were being cornered. The bedroom was a dead end. He grabbed Sarah and Toby, shoving them toward the door he had just barricaded. He kicked the chair away and threw the door open, the hallway beyond looking like a long, dark throat leading back down to the ground floor. They scrambled down the stairs, the sound of the creature's limbs clicking against the ceiling behind them. It wasn't chasing them on the floor. It was skittering along the rafters, its weight causing the house to groan and sway. As they reached the foyer, the heat from the porch light outside bled through the cracks of the front door. The golden glow was now a cursed thing, a spotlight for their execution. Elias knew they couldn't stay inside, but the mountain air outside was thick with the presence of more than one entity. He looked at the light switch by the door, the one he had stubbornly ignored hours ago. The bulb outside was still burning, casting its long amber rectangle across the porch. Beyond that rectangle, dozens of pale, elongated shapes were visible in the mist, standing perfectly still, waiting for the light to go out or the door to open. They were trapped between a single predator inside and a silent congregation outside. Elias reached for the switch, his hand trembling. He realized the neighbor's warning wasn't just about the light, it was about the invitation. By leaving it on, he had invited the entire mountain to watch them die. The air in the foyer turned frigid, the kind of cold that crystallized the breath and made the lungs ache. Elias stood paralyzed, his finger hooked over the cold plastic of the light switch. Behind them, the clicking sound on the ceiling stopped. He didn't have to look up to know that the creature was positioned directly above them. Its spindly limbs braced against the crown molding. The low-frequency hum intensified, vibrating through the soles of their feet until Sarah fell to her knees, clutching her ears. Toby huddled beneath her, his small body shaking with rhythmic, silent sobs. Elias looked at the front door one last time. Through the thin wood, he could hear the congregation outside. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a cacophony of whispers. They were all speaking at once, using the voices of people the Millers had known back in the city, old friends, distant relatives, even the voice of Sarah's mother who had passed away years ago. They weren't asking to come in anymore. They were thanking him. They were thanking him for the light. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow. The light wasn't just a beacon. It was a bridge. The creature above them began to descend, its elongated skull dropping into the beam of Elias's flashlight. The jagged slit of its mouth peeled back, pawned, revealing no teeth, only a bottomless gullet of pure shadow. It let out a sound that shattered the remaining glass in the foyer, a perfect, high-pitched mimicry of Toby's laughter. In that moment of absolute terror, Elias made his choice. He didn't turn the light off. He knew now that the darkness wouldn't save them. The things outside had already seen them. Paused. Instead, he slammed his hand down, not on the switch, but on the deadbolt. He threw the door wide open. The amber light flooded out into the mist, illuminating the dozens of entities standing on the lawn. They were all identical to the one in the house, gaunt, gray, and eyeless. As the door swung back, the creature from the ceiling dropped, but it didn't attack Elias. It glided past him, joining its kin on the porch. The whispers stopped instantly. One of the entities, larger than the rest, stepped into the rectangle of light. It tilted its head, mimicking Elias's own posture, and then it reached out a multi-jointed hand, not in a threat, but in a silent, horrific invitation. The Millers didn't scream as the shadows from the mountain began to pour over the threshold. The light stayed on, burning bright against the Appalachian night, until the bulb finally flickered and died. When Silas drove by the next morning at sunrise, the porch was empty. The door was standing wide open, the light fixture was smashed, and the only thing left behind were hundreds of long, gray fingerprints covering every inch of the white siding, reaching all the way up to the roof. The mountains were silent once more, waiting for the next family to ignore the warning of the porch light. The mountains never forget a face, and once you've been seen by the light, there is no hiding in the dark. If you survived the Millers' first night, click the video on your screen to uncover more Appalachian secrets. And remember, check your porch light before you go to sleep tonight. Subscribe, or you might be the next one to hear the knocking.